That's probably a good chunk. Raise your hand if that's familiar to you. Yay, yay. So that is the Baccaral from, I'm going to say Act 3, even though sometimes, and we'll get into that, Act 2 and Act 3 can jump around. But I'm going to hand over to Maggie real quick to kind of give an overview of Hoffman himself, especially, and just kind of introduce us to the opera a little bit.
So John and I were laughing because this is one of those operas that's just always one of those, I explained earlier today, to me it's like the guy holding the picture and he's in the picture holding a picture and they're in a picture holding a picture. It's really convoluted. Thank you. For those of you who don't know, Quarantine Opera has a cocktail for every show and I'm on a mission to try all of them. John makes them. Here's mine. Cheers to those of you who are cocktailing with us. Tis the time of day. It's 5 o'clock. And if you didn't go on the blog yet, you should totally go just for the cocktails because they're fabulous. Okay, so all of that said, Tales of Hoffman has this convoluted history and it comes from a convoluted series of people. So just to start you off with the first few tidbits, Hoffman wrote, E.T.A. Hoffman, the original story writer, wanted to be many, many things, and he wanted to be famous for many things. And he, in fact, did not become famous in his lifetime for any of those things, but he did create a number of inspirations for other great minds that have resulted in things like The Nutcracker and Coppelia. And he wrote a lot of the earliest science fiction, but not from a place of love and enthusiasm, from a place of fear. So one of the stories in Tales of Hoffman, which you will see, but first I have to walk you through a few more of these picture frames, is about a woman who, the character in the opera Hoffman, see, gets confusing already, falls in love with a woman who's actually a robot doll, okay? And in the story, this was a terrifying thing where the scientists could take over and change all of reality, and you know, what would all of these new inventions and discoveries mean for the average Joe? And what's interesting to me is, for those of you who are nerds, and I am married to a deep, deep dive nerd, so I get to hear lots of cool stuff. When they first started to develop robots who looked like people, they in fact were a little too good, and people were very uncomfortable. They found it disconcerting. So they actually rolled it back. And that's why most robots that we see today look like robots. Because if artificial intelligence looks too human and they're too good at expressing themselves, it actually makes the person interacting with them just feel off. Everything just feels uncomfortable. And I would love to experience myself out of curiosity, but I'm like, okay, so maybe he had a little bit of sense to his neuroses. That said, his life was complicated and convoluted, but the root of it really is that he served in his creative genius to just light all of these flashbulbs for other people and other creatives, which I think is fascinating. Now, two of these creatives wrote a play where they wove together a number of stories that Hoffman, the author, had written, and they decided to put Hoffman, the man, into their play as their main character to sew all of these pieces together. Kind of a cool artifice. And our wonderful Offenbach, our composer, decided this play was so cool, he wanted to turn it into an opera. And that's where Tales of Hoffman, the opera, comes from, is this chain of the original author getting put into his own work 2 times in a row through multiple interpretations. Now, they say that Hoffman, the author, put a lot of himself into his characters, and that the playwrights then in turn put a little more of Hoffman into himself in the stories. And Offenbach and Hoffman have many things in common. They both had very sharp minds. They were incredibly talented at becoming good at what they were doing in multiple ways. And apparently Offenbach put a little of himself into Hoffman, the character, as well. So with that beginning point of layers upon layers upon layers, I'm going to hand it back to John to tell you a little about Offenbach and his genius, which is of a whole different flavor.
Well, just jumping on board is also, Maggie and I were talking today that we as society have kind of this like hero manifestation. So it's like artists are like greater than they are. So we almost tell tall tales. And so like, for instance, people will like make Beethoven like was deaf, and they'll think that that was all of his life, and no, it was actually kind of his late period, and he knew music beforehand, but it's like he was deaf and made beautiful music. No. And Mozart wrote everything by the age of 3. And so Hoffman of himself was kind of like, I feel like, legendized by people coming behind him. And so going into Offenbach a little bit, like Rossini describes him as the Mozart of, and I'm going to butcher this, excuse me, Maggie, with the French, but the Champs-Élysées.
Champs-Élysées. We should make the Emery say it.
And what is most of Offenbach's life, and where he was kind of a genius too, most of his career started by the age of 17. He wrote over 100 staged works, mostly operetta. And we kind of think of it as kind of operetta as light, but it's just kind of like a lot of these operettas are still going. If you don't know, I'm going to share again with you. This is from one of his operettas. And I'm sure you're going to recognize.
I sure hope you're going to recognize.
There you go yet? Here we go. That's a good place to stop. But that comes from his operetta, actually, Orfeo. And like another one of his big operettas that is known is La Belle Helena, which is all kind of about the Helen of Troy. But this is all kind of almost satirical. And so a lot of things in light opera include like sentimental romantic scenes. It's kind of the rom-coms of the romantic era. And then on top of it, giant dance numbers, especially because you're in Paris and like you have the ballet. And so anytime you could like do a cross art form, the bigger, the better. And so he's kind of the first of all of this operetta. So then after this, you get the GNS happening in Gilbert and Sullivan in England. You get the Lehars in Austria, the Strauss in Austria, that they're going to kind of emulate Offenbach in ways of making stage works that are satirical, funny, that kind of are relevant of the times, but also have great music and keep going.
So just to add to what John's saying, a lot of times when he said everyone thinks funny is funny, cute, rom-com, right? At the time, there was so much happening politically, and there were so many restrictions on where you could speak freely. You could get away with a lot more with a funny show than you could if you were telling something dramatically. People weren't paying as close attention. They had a little bit more wiggle room, and they could kind of like dance it off the stage, literally. And to make it even more interesting, when Offenbach got started with this whole scene where he was, living opera buffa and creating the art form in many ways, he was looking around at what was selling nearby and what they didn't have. And the World's Fair was coming, and he thought, a bunch of people are going to come from all over the place, and I can give them something new as long as I make it really accessible and create a market. So here he was completely an entrepreneur. This is not somebody who was giving his deepest, darkest, turmoil life. He was creating art that people could enjoy. It's like the popcorn opera, right? Where you could just sit down and have a great time, and it was hilarious. And as John said, dancers, a lot of fun. And that was it. It was fun, and it was light, and it might have a couple of needling points, but it worked. So as a composer, to have that kind of business sense, that was pretty incredible, I'd say, in any age.
And Maggie and I were talking a little bit earlier, like we kind of, for some reason, put dramatic works on a precipice. Like if you think of even movies today, it's like who's up for the Oscar? It's all of these pieces that you're only going to really want to watch once because it's just too hard to watch it more than once. And comedic actors and comedic like writers are as gifted, if not more, because like in order to be funny, you have to already have the drama down. The laughter is in the realism that's already there. So we consider Hoffman, the Tales of Hoffman, his first grand work, but don't let that fool you. The works before that have just as much meat to them and have stood the times as they are, and they're still done today. We're gonna break in a little bit and kind of talk to you a little bit about Hoffman. One of the things that about E.T. Hoffman is a lot of his works also like to bring in the supernatural and the sinister. And so in all of these acts, there's kind of the base character kind of keeps coming back, and we don't know if he's exactly the devil or just a bad guy. He's kind of in this spooky way, but he keeps coming on to sabotage all of Hoffman's relationships. And so the way the show is structured is it has a prologue and then 3 acts and then an epilogue. And in the prologue and in the epilogue is basically a bar scene where Hoffman is explaining, like he's getting inebriated, so to speak, and then he's like, they've all pushed him into telling a story because that's what he does. He has all these stories to tell, and so he tells them 3 stories about different loves of his life. And then the thing to know is that in the show are a bunch of characters and a chorus, but the main ones are Hoffman, Niklaus / the Muse, Olympia, Antonia, Giulietta, yeah, Stella, and then Lindorf, Coppelius, Dr. Miracle, and Der Partuto. And all of these 4 characters really in the original thing were one voice each. It was a tenor, a mezzo, a soprano, and a bass. And
which works great for all of them except the women, because you'll hear, we've got some excerpts later, there are very few women in the world who can sing all of these roles. And by that, we mean the soprano, not the mezzo. That doubling is always the way it is. But what's remarkable is that this is really taking every different voice type you can cook up, slapping them all into one place, and hoping to God the soprano's got the high notes in the heft, which I would pay any amount of money to see somebody sing all of them, because the few people who have are really legends. They're vocal heavyweights. I don't even know how to put it. John?
And so to speak, like, and having one soprano especially being able to play them, because what we get, so there's kind of 2 plots to the show as I kind of see it. There's the one plot, and that's the Muse / Nicholas trying to push Hoffman into his true love, which is literacy or literary and art and in general. And he / she is kind of trying to like, no, that person's not good for you. You need to go back to writing. Writing's everything. And then simultaneously you have these women throughout the whole show, the soprano, that you find out like these different extremes, because they are very much an extreme. You have the doll, you have the sickly, that if she sings, she's going to sing herself to death. And then you have the courtesan, which is not in for love, it's more for money and power. And then Stella, his true love, like in the show. And you find out by the end that all of these women encompass just Stella. And so having one person being able to play it is very, very cool. Just to kind of get back to hearing some music, I want to give you kind of a compare and contrast of, for instance, the doll aria versus Antonia's aria in Act 2, the sickly ingenue. But so in this, I have Diane Demrau, and you're going to hear her in both excerpts. So the doll's aria we've kind of described as kind of the craziest aria probably ever given to soprano. Da, da, da. I'm going to share right now. That's a good stop to stop with her. But
I was going to say, Zoom apparently refuses to do the high notes too.
And then compare that to her then in like less than probably half an hour having to sing like this. And so you can already tell that like this is a very special soprano that can take on both of these, because you have one that has the stratosphere and notes that she can run for days, or they have power and lungs that are ginormous because the line that they need in the second. Maggie, do you want to talk a little bit about the third female, especially?
I will. I was laughing with John. I have a soft spot for Giulietta. It was one of the first roles I got to perform in public. And, you know, she's really kind of slimy. And it's so nice as a woman to get to perform a villain. Because usually you've got, it's opera, right? All of these were written so long ago. All the women are damsels in distress. You're always getting killed on stage. I started as a mezzo, like Megan, who's on the call with us. And, oh, I wanted to be a mezzo because they get pants rolls. And when you get to pretend you're a man, like Niklaus, they let you do cool stuff on stage. But when you're a woman, they put you in a hoop skirt and you've got to be, you know, the lady tied to the train tracks all the time. Well, Giulietta is not tied to the train tracks. Her whole goal in life is to steal Hoffman's shadow and pretty much sell it for influence. She uses her love as a weapon and draws him in and makes him think he's her whole world. And then she takes it. She's just, and then just kind of heads off. She's fine. Like no emotional ties whatsoever. In the meantime, Hoffman is destroyed by this betrayal and watches her waltz off with some other guy. The depth of characters in this, when you consider that this is a man who specialized in writing the can-can kind of music, is really remarkable. And he didn't get to finish this opera. He actually died first. So the orchestration was finished by someone else. And the original orchestration was burned in a fire. And nobody can quite decide how all of these pieces fit together. We just know that they do. So sometimes you'll see Antonia's scene, the woman who sings herself to death, go before Giulietta, sometimes afterwards. He had very strong feelings, but different opera houses have handled it different ways. And there are so many versions of the Tales of Hoffman that if you choose as an opera house to do this show, you've got months of homework before you can even get started on rehearsals, which is kind of fun. I want to open this up for questions because we've only got a few more minutes, and then we have a special performance for you. Megan is going to do a little Niklaus. We haven't talked a lot about him, but Niklaus is that tempting muse who's serves as Hoffman's best friend through the whole opera, but is really kind of sabotaging his success so that he'll give up and go back to her, which makes things kind of fun. So does anyone have questions before we get a special treat for Megan? I knew there'd be a hand.
Go for it.
Barbara.
Oh, I don't have a question. I just want to tell you how much I'm enjoying this. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
It's just wonderful.
It's kind of the highlight of my week too, to get to come talk about opera and have fun and let people laugh.
I think I saw Tales of the Hoffman as a movie not so long ago.
Okay.
And, I've always loved the music.
I know. It's a beautiful show. I did it in a really broke little house in Germany and it was still beautiful. Yes, Catherine.
I've only heard the music. I'm a volunteer at our local symphony, and to me, Tales of Hoffman is music only. But when I listen to the little pieces that you had on the website, I was just thrilled with the performances. I really want to see this. And
oh, I'm glad to hear that. If it's ever performed near you, I do encourage you to go. And I know it's hard to hear the musical excerpts on Zoom. So if you want to dive in a little deeper, you can get all of those excerpts and more on the Quarantine Opera blog post. So if whatever technical difficulties we have here, it's all available to you at home. Do I have one more question before I hand it over to Megan? All right, Megan, take it away.
All right, perfect. All right, so this is the violin aria from the Antonia Act of Tales of Hoffman. And just like John and Maggie were saying, this is sort of the epitome of Nicklaus's because he's really the muse, just the plea to Hoffman to really realize that art is his true love. And so sometimes if the Antonia Act is the last one, it's sort of like his final plea to Hoffman. So anyways,
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second to say,
Sure.
Megan is part of the Baumgartner Studio Artists of the Florentine Opera, and we are so happy, despite the current circumstances, they are still performing on our behalf. So thank you. Carry on.
Yes. Thank you. So this is the violin aria. Oh, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for that. I'm guessing it feels good to finally get to perform again a little bit.
It does. It feels awesome. Thank you for listening.
That was beautiful, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone on the call for being here. I recognize some of you. I'm so happy to see Diane and a number of you who I don't get to see regularly, but I hope you'll join us again. We have some, I think we're doing Johnny Skiki next week.
Yeah, next week is Il Trittico. We're going to explore the 3 one-act operas of Puccini, Il Taboro, Suor Angelica, and Johnny Skiki.
This is another opportunity to get a sampler platter all within one show from one composer, because he put these together to really highlight the different types of opera that there are, but to do it all in one night in 3 scenes. And they are often broken up, but they're really cool together. And he got mighty ferocious about making sure they were performed that way. It's very expensive to do 3 one-act operas in one night. So you'll often see 1 or 2 of them paired with maybe one other show, but it is a beautiful grouping. And given our time constraints, I think we'll mostly focus on one, but we'll try to give you a taste of all of them, because I have to say, I love them all for different reasons. They have very different flavors and they're extraordinary. So if you want to do a little homework, check the blog beforehand, it's up already. And if you don't want to do any homework, make yourself John's cocktail, and we'll see you here next week. I think Christine's got a few announcements.
I do. I want to thank you all again for joining us. As Maggie said, this really is a highlight of the week. It's so wonderful to have Megan back, first of all. It's been so long. Yes, people, yes, an audience. So thank you all so much for joining Florentine Opera. We also want to thank Rotary Club of Milwaukee. We are co-hosting this event together. So I want to give a shout out to them as well. Please join us next week if you can. Same place, same time. I'll send out the link again on Wednesday mornings. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, John. Thank you, Megan. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.